Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Brian McCall, the editor-in-chief of Catholic Family News. And as announced yesterday, we're having a live session. So it was the first time we've tried this at Catholic Family News, and we don't have the more kind of advanced software to have both Matt and I. So I'm giving this a try myself. So we'll see how it goes, but have a little patience if we have some technical glitches, which I hope not. But thank you for overwhelming response for the video yesterday. It's gotten a lot of views. Thank you to those who have forwarded it around and gotten it to be seen by many people. What I'm going to do, we're just getting close to noon, just a few more minutes, so maybe give people a minute or two to join. But I'll just give a very brief introduction. I think most people are familiar with the topic after yesterday. It's all a buzz. And then answer some questions. There were some questions in the comments yesterday. And then I'll also take live questions in the chat, the comment section, the chat section, and we'll answer them live for anyone who has any here. So there, I just sent it out as a message for anyone, so you know that you can enter your comments there. So welcome again for those still joining, seeing a few people trickle in. As you all know, most likely, yesterday, Pope Francis issued a letter motu proprio, which means of his own authority, technically not coming through a congregation, as other documents can be developed. And in this document, he essentially banned, I mean, there's really no way around it, the traditional Latin Mass, essentially. He attempted to say it is no longer allowed, but then allowed the diocesan bishops to, here and there in a little broom cupboard on every third Thursday of the month, allow one priest to maybe say a Mass. Again, summarizing a bit, but that's the sort of structure he purported to do. It's banned, but there can be some exceptions granted. And again, for those who have not yet seen it, Matt and I did an extensive video yesterday going line by line through the document yesterday. So let me begin with two questions that came through the comments yesterday, and then I will get to the couple questions and comments that have come in already. So Alberto Ampalo asked a question. He said, isn't this letter just like the approach of the Chinese communists? And I think that's a really keen question. This does seem to be very much the approach of the Chinese communists. What they did was they tried to quarantine the church in China, as I think Mr. Ampalo understands from his question, by saying, okay, no new churches, you can't build churches, you can't expand, you can't attempt to find converts, you kind of get cabined in where you are, nothing new. And then the next step is then begin persecuting those who are still Catholic. So again, I think you're very right. That's a very keen observation, that it does seem to be the same process as the Chinese communists undertook. And again, no surprise, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has told us that essentially the, Bergoglio, remember he says, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote in front of me, but Bergoglio and Francis are equally indebted to their Chinese masters, right? We have the deep church and deep state are kind of playing from the same playbook. Then it was Mary Sweeney who asked yesterday, where is it that someone said that the words of the Mass couldn't be changed? And again, I think what she was referring to is a bull called Quo Primum, which many of you may be familiar with, which was issued by Pope St. Pius V. And I think the language that she's referring to says, where first he says, by these presents, this law, in virtue of our apostolic authority, we grant and concede in perpetuity that for the chanting or reading of the Mass in any church whatsoever, this missal, the one that he canonized, is hereafter to be followed absolutely, without any scruple of conscience or fear of incurring any penalty, judgment, or censure. And then he goes on to say that you cannot be obliged to celebrate Mass otherwise than as enjoined by us. We likewise declare and ordain that no one whosoever is forced or coerced to alter this missal, and that this present document cannot be revoked or modified, but remain always valid and retain its full force or effect. Um, so what I think the language she's referring to is that no one can alter this missal. And one thing I think to understand that, though, is what I think the Pope meant there is not so much that a future Pope couldn't alter it in the organic sense, add some new feast days, as certainly happened, make some changes to the calendar. Um, for example, in Italy, St. Maria Goretti was added by Pius XII to the Italian calendar. What he meant was priests couldn't alter it. So what he meant was essentially no creativity, no what the new Mass allows and encourages. The priest couldn't say, well, I'm just going to change this prayer around. So again, I don't think by that line, if that's what you're referring to, if Mary's on, he wasn't saying that no pope could make some minor changes. Again, John the 23rd, again, you can talk about the prudence of it, but he certainly could add the name of St. Joseph into the Mass under quo primum. But some priests couldn't do it on their own. Couldn't just say, well, I want to add this. That sounds like a good thing to do. But again, what's important about that is he said nobody could forbid this Mass. So he didn't technically say you couldn't have new rights develop, and there's some issues around whether that's legitimate, but he just said no one could get rid of this missal, and that's the legal posture. So I hope that answers Mary's question. So going on to another Mary Vigil. She says, did the FSSP have to ask permission to say Mass today or for this Sunday? I think that's a really interesting question, and this is where the document is not very well thought through legally. I mean, it's not really written. It's got a lot of sort of internal contradictions. So in a certain sense, it appears yes, one reading of it, because the document says that any priest, and it just says any priest. It doesn't say other than those who are connected to the Institutes of Consecrated Life, right? It makes distinctions later, but in that article, it says any priest who already celebrates the Mass has to go to the bishop to obtain permission. Again, that any priest would seem to include the FSSP and any other group for that matter. But then it does sort of treat them a little differently because it refers to these groups that have as part of their constitution saying the Mass. So it kind of recognizes they're different, but it doesn't. It really doesn't say. I mean, I think one reading is yes, they do need, again, if this assuming this thing is actually valid, which I think is not I don't think we can get into that if someone wants, but I think it is an unjust law, which is not of any force. But on its terms, I think could be read to say that. Now, I don't know what the priests are doing. I haven't heard. I don't know if they are just calling the bishop and saying everything's still good, right? And it also says for that, it's also clear, it doesn't say when they have to ask permission. It just says need to, again, it would apply immediately, it would seem, because he says the faculties are revoked. But if you want to continue using it, you have to ask the bishop. But like how soon? And can you continue it while you're waiting? It doesn't really answer that. So I think there are some ambiguities in that. And I don't know what those priests are doing, to be honest. I haven't heard from any of them. But you ask a very good question. This is, again, I don't think they cared about the nuances, the details. They didn't really care about it. They just care about stopping the Mass. So I hope that answers your question the best I can, Mary. Loel, I'm sorry if I've not pronounced that correctly, Loel, says children under 18 not allowed to attend in China. I guess that's a comment. I assume, I'm not aware of that, but there must be a law or rule in China that he's saying. And that's interesting that they're saying they don't want children because, again, you want to cut off growth. You want it to die out on its own. And that's interesting. That's not in this document, but that is something that was suggested by one of Francis's collaborators some months ago, that young people shouldn't be allowed to go to the traditional Mass. And again, that's kind of interesting because it's like, they know, well, if young people go, they're going to love it. So don't let them go because they'll actually like it's, kind of interesting. But thank you for that comment, and I wasn't aware of that fact. Paul Perla has a question. All other popes, including John the 23rd, respected quo primum, and none tampered with it. Again, a comment. I think what you mean by that, when John the 23rd issued his changes to the missal, he didn't, and he has to the most sweeping changes of the missal since Pius V. Again, everything else was extremely minor. John the 23rds were more extensive. They didn't really touch the ordinary of the Mass per se. But interestingly, what I think you're referring to is every pope that did edit or change a few things always included the bull primum in the front of the missal. So if you open a 1962 altar missal, it has quo primum, together with any other bulls after that, to sort of say this is the same missal as quo primum. When Paul VI issued the 1970 69, the Novus Ordo, whatever you want to call it, the post-conciliar rites, the quo primum was stripped out, which was sort of an interesting admission by Paul VI that this is not the same missal. It's not just a new edition of the same missal. It is a totally different missal. It was not included, quo primum. It was the first time since quo primum that it was not included. And so they did respect it. Incidentally, that's one of the reasons that Archbishop Lefebvre, although he had some questions about the changes to the missal that were done both by Pius XII and John the 23rd. He acknowledged there were some issues there, potentially. But he said, this is the last missal that we can't necessarily on principle object to, because he said, look, quo primum is there. He gave lots of other reasons. It doesn't clearly endanger the faith. And again, that's why he sort of said, well, I think we can accept 1962. That was his position. But he did point to that, as Paul Perla does, that quo primum was still there. Alberto Ampar, the person whose comment I responded to at the beginning, says, hello, do you believe that this motu proprio will open the eyes of more Novus Ordo households, and thus more families will be heading to priories? I think so. Good question. I think so. I hope so. I hope my thinking isn't just hope. But I think what's good about this, and I recorded a different video with Chris Ferrara last night on the Fatima Center, which covered much of the ground that we did at Catholic Family News. But it's one of the things I said what's good about this is it is so open, so in your face. I mean, he's so blunt. He says in the letter, the whole goal of the traditional Mass is to get people away from it. I'm allowing it just to transition away in due time. That you can't really do a two-step around it, right? You can't, and many times things Francis has done, like Amoris Laetitia, there are those who, it's not that bad, it's really not, we have to interpret it properly. And I actually worried he would do that. He would say, I love the traditional Mass, I love what Benedict did, I'm doing exactly what he did, but then undermine it, and people would sort of be able to bury their head in the sand and say he didn't really attack the Mass. I think this one, you just can't get around it. It's so blatant that I hope it will open people's eyes, as you say, and they'll just sort of say, you know what, it's time to get off the fence. I need to just, realize this is, a war he's declared on the traditional faith, and they'll sort of, act whatever that is in their circumstance, wherever that means they need to go accordingly. So I hope so. Again, not everybody, even in England, and I always go back to the Reformation. I spent a lot of time studying it in England. Even the Act of Supremacy, even when the Mass changed in 1549, up until then it was more or less the same. But when Cranmer introduced the prayer book, there are some people that woke them up and they said, you know what, this is no longer the Catholic Church. I can't do this anymore. But there were even people then who rationalized it, and we just need to get along. We need to do this. So I'm sure there'll be some who will, and I've already seen a few on the internet promoted by America Magazine and others saying, even if you love the Latin Mass, this is just the sacrifice the Pope is asking you to make. So just make this sacrifice. So it won't be universal, but I'm hopeful, as you say, that it will be many more who will say, look, the only way to fight this is to stand firm and only stay with the traditional Mass, and to support priests and only say it. So I hope so. Matthew Joseph says the canon arguments against this motu proprio should be strong. Pray for us, doctors of the Church. Good comment. Again, I think they are. I think the arguments are very clear. This exceeds the authority of the Pope on several levels. One, as Benedict said, what was sacred before can never be declared forbidden. The Old Mass could never be abrogated. If you remember, there was a commission of 9 cardinals in the 1980s, including Cardinal Ratzinger at the time, who studied the question, could the traditional Mass be abolished and be forbidden universally? And the answer was no. It was 8-1 was the decision. They said it's not possible legally. So I think this exceeds the authority of the lawgiver. This is something that is beyond, you can't just like, canonists and theologians would say, well, could the Pope excommunicate the entire church. Just say, I'm going to get rid of the entire church except for me. They said, no, there's just no way he could do that. It's impossible. Or could the Pope declare that there's four gods? Well, no, it exceeds his authority. There are things he could purport to say, but just don't. Aside from that, a little more subtly, St. Thomas says a law is an ordinance of reason issued by one with care of the community, which is promulgated for the common good. This decree is not for the common good of the church. It is making war on the common good of the church, and therefore, as St. Thomas says, a law not ordained to the common good is no law at all. So I think the legal arguments, and I've just summarized them, are quite strong. I would agree with you it's just beyond the power of the lawgiver. Thank you, Veronica V. says Lowell is correct, so thanks for confirming that. Karen Albanese Gemin, apologize if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Our bishop's secretary said our TLM will be held on Sunday. Great. That's good that I've heard that. I'm happy to hear that for you. And again, this is what I think I said yesterday. The immediate fallout of this is going to depend where you are. It's going to depend on your bishop. And there are bishops around there who either are in favor of the Latin Mass or just, they see there's bigger fish to fry. It's like there's a lot more problems in the church than worry about this. And why cause a problem when there is none? And I'm sure they'll just say, yes, go ahead. Everything's fine. But bishops that have been chomping at the bit to stamp this out, like in Dijon, like I've bet in places like Chicago with Cardinal Subich, I think they're not going to get the same answer. So I think everyone's experience of this will vary depending on their bishop at the present time. Next question, Catherine Sarto. How do you think that the SSPX will react to this document? It's interesting. I noticed yesterday, at least the U.S. district, they were putting out lots of articles, was their first reaction. So they republished or circulated around the Adiavani intervention, which is the critical study of the new Mass that was Archbishop Lefebvre organized and was introduced by Cardinals Adiavani and Bacci, which concluded that the new Mass in its whole and its parts is a striking departure from the definition of the Mass in the Council of Trent. Then they also circulated a study by Father Schmidberger showing the errors of the new Mass, the problems of the new Mass, why it's not the same as traditional Mass. So I think that's their first response, to remind everyone, we've always said the new Mass is not legitimate. We do not accept its legitimacy, and here's why. I would think there may be some statement that they may issue. I don't know. I have no inside information. But essentially, I think if they were to react, their reaction would be they're saddened for others than the society priests. Because as I think I mentioned yesterday, Summorum Pontificum did nothing for the society. I mean, they've only exclusively ever said the traditional Mass from the time of their founding, and maintained that they had every right to and didn't need Summorum Pontificum. And when Bishop Fillet asked, if you recall, John Paul II wanted to have some discussions, and Bishop Fillet said, I won't talk to you, and this is extraordinary if you think about it, until you meet three demands. And the Pope did it. Right? He said, oh, yeah, okay, we'll accept those. Right? Eventually, it took a few years. But he said, one, you have to free the Mass, not for us, but for every priest to be able to say it. You need to squash that phony decree of excommunication against the bishops, and you have to engage in doctrinal discussions. And over the next 8 years, the Vatican did all three, the first of which was freeing the Mass. And he said, we do not ask this for ourselves. This will not help us in any way. We're already saying the Mass exclusively. But this is for every priests that need this. And so I think they would express sadness for priests that are being having this purportedly taken away from them. And I think they will encourage, just continue doing as they did to priests in the 70s. Priests who were not affiliated with the society, who were just, priests who just didn't, they said, keep doing it. So I would expect that there'll be reaction, not to worry, and to just encourage priests to keep going. Can bishops allow, this is from Mocha 562, can bishops allow TLM indefinitely? Again, it's interesting. Again, take the document on its terms. It doesn't say bishops can allow the Mass. It's focused on priests. They can only allow individual priests to say it. And then the really odd thing, and Chris Ferrara pointed this out, it says in Article 3, they must appoint a priest in their diocese to oversee all traditional Masses. And what's weird about that, it seems to be saying like only one priest per diocese. Maybe that's what they're saying. It depends what they mean by that. It's a little wiggly, ambiguous. It's one of the reasons I looked for the Latin text immediately, because the Latin should be more precise, but they haven't released a Latin text. which is interesting because the official language of the church is Latin. So technically it's not a law until it's Latin, the Latin text is issued. But that's sort of a minor point. But in any event, it's not really clear because it doesn't be talking about authorizing a mass, it's authorizing priests. And I think in a sense, if you get the permission, it seems to say you have it. But remember, then it says we've got to have these secret police people around checking up on all the groups, making sure that they're not bad people, as Chris Farrar says, these vague terms. So I think at any point it empowers bishops to say, well, your permission's revoked because, you don't meet the litmus test for agreeing with Vatican II. So we'll see. I think some bishops could argue they could proceed on that basis. Dean Barker. I'm definitely not advocating for sedevacantism, but in the wake of this motu proprio, would it be sinful, schismatic to attend a non-unicum mass if there's not another option? So a couple things for those who may not know. When he says a non-unicum mass, what he's referring to is in the canon, in the first part of the canon, there's a part where the priest says he is praying unicum with, and then he names the Pope, Francis, the current Pope. And then if he's not a bishop himself, he then names the diocesan bishop where the church is located. Bishops, because they're bishops, don't name another bishop. They just name the Pope. But a non-unicum mass is, for example, in the time of a sedevacante reign, when the Pope dies and there's no new Pope, you omit the unicum because there's no Pope to pray with. And so sedevacantists, people who maintain that the see is vacant, like in an interregnum when popes die, omit the unicum. So a couple things about sedevacantism. And this came up in the Roman Forum. If you listen to my Roman Forum lecture, which is on Remnant TV, I address this. I think we have to be very careful. I think my position is, has always been, and Catholic Family News has been, that sedevacantism as a sort of objective belief, and by that, sedevacantism means a lot of different things. As Chris Farrar said in his lecture, you've met one sedevacantist, you've met one sedevacantist, right? There's kind of like all different stripes of them. But what I mean by the term is someone who says you must, as a matter of belief, of the faith essentially in your salvation, believe that the see is vacant. And they make it kind of a litmus test. And for priests, they say you must omit the unicum or you're sort of somehow, like not Catholic. And again, I think objectively that is just not possible. I think that is not reconcilable with principles of the faith. That does certainly not preclude, I think, speculation in the sense of saying, I can't understand this. What's going on? Is it possible someday the church will declare that actually was an anti-pope or this wasn't valid? And again, I think that's just mystery. That's just saying, I don't understand this. The church will have to tell us later. Archbishop Lefebvre himself expressed, he said, I just can't make sense of this. How can we understand the Pope doing these things? It's a mystery. And when people said, is Paul VI the Pope? He says, I have to treat him as if he is the Pope. I have to accept him as the Pope because the church universally seems to, but again, it's for a later official organ of the church to discuss. And again, he sort of said maybe that'll happen, but we can't act individually. We don't have the authority to say ourselves. And again, that's where the line gets crossed, where you say you must omit the name of the Pope. You must, and make it sort of a dogmatic belief. So now again, some people say, well, can I go to sedevacantist masses? Again, I think I think you need to talk to a good spiritual director that you trust. And as I said, sedevacantist, or are they sedevacantist, independent? What are they really making you do? It varies, right? It varies. I mean, is it just a priest who's an independent priest who's kind of expressed, I can't know what to make of Francis. Maybe someday they won't be the Pope. I mean, and somebody's calling him a sedevacantist. You really have to look at the particulars. And I would talk to a good priest who you can explain the particulars to and get his advice on whether, it's good to go there or not. Obviously, the Mass is valid if they're valid priests. And again, it's more a question of danger to your faith. If you go and they're just sort of telling you must believe these things and it gets you confused and you can be careful about that. I mean, on the unicum point, to be honest, you'll have no idea if a priest is omitting the unicum or saying it, right? It's silent. It's sotto voce. So I wouldn't get so hung up about that because, you're just going to Mass. And it's like if the priest messes up a rubric or does something wrong that you can't tell, I mean, you're not responsible for that. That's the beauty of the traditional mass in some ways for the laity, right? It's all on the priest. It's not, we don't know what's, we don't know what he's doing, and we're not responsible. So I wouldn't get hung up in saying, I got to interview the priest. Are you using the unicum or not? That's just beyond our we need to do. So my advice is get a, talk to a good solid priest. I know the Society of St. Pius X priests are very balanced on this. Again, they are very strong. We don't accept Sedevacantism philosophy, but they are very understanding and say, well, you say this priest is a Sedevacantist. What does that mean? Last footnote that you have to be careful with, and Chris Farrar addresses this in his Roman Forum lecture. There are branches of Sedevacantism, of groups that trace their ordinations to what are the so-called Thuk line of bishops. This is complicated history. There's this Bishop Thuk who, again, because of the crisis in the church, he claimed consecrating bishops, but then there's just some doubt over the validity of his, and I'm not saying they were invalid, but he definitely seemed to have some mental difficulties potentially, and the most has officially been said is it's just hard to know what his mental states were, whether he actually could have formed the intention to ordain, or there's a cloud over that. And I'm not any Sedevacantist people listening, or I'm not saying that any are unvalidly ordained, but that is just sort of another wrinkle with that. Their ordinations are traced, and the bishops who are ordaining now are kind of, some of them, not all, but some of those groups are through these sort of lines, again, with these sort of secret ordinations and consecrations that came out later. And there's just sort of some, and again, if you don't have an valid ordination, there's no valid mass. Obviously, for individual lay people, if you don't know that, you're not committing a sin, right? It's not like God gets to heaven and says, oh, by the way, that mass you went to for 5 years, you didn't know it, but that wasn't a valid priest. You're going to hell. God's not going to do that, right? There's a case, where in Ireland before the council, where there was a bishop, probably a modernist, I think, who specifically withheld the intention to ordain priests for many times as a bishop. He was an enemy of the church, and he came out and said, I never ordained those priests. I formed a contrary intention. And the church had to scramble around reordaining, re-administering sacraments, but they reassured the faithful and said, look, you obviously didn't receive the sacrament if it was not a real priest, but God will supply particular graces to you based on your state of mind, your intention. So again, we don't reserve the sacraments, but God doesn't. God is not here to trip us up. So I wouldn't, panic about that about that situation. But again, best advice: talk to a priest you trust and get good direct advice. Hope that answers your question. Catherine Sarto, don't the diocesan bishops need to ask Rome for permission to allow the TLM in their diocese? And therefore, if they allow it to continue this Sunday, they would be considered disobedient. Under the document, technically not. So the document makes a distinction. It says, for priests ordained after today, meaning yesterday, those priests cannot offer the traditional mass without first making a formal petition to their bishop to get permission, and their bishop can't grant it without consulting with Rome. So new priests ordained after yesterday, then the bishop has to, and again, it doesn't quite say get approval, but it says must consult with Rome. Vague, what's that mean? When do you know you've consulted? Open air. But for existing priests, it doesn't include that language. So an existing priest who says, hey, I've been doing it, can I continue? On the document itself, it says you can just grant permission. So any bishop who says to existing priests, you can continue, again, is not technically disobeying the document. I'll tell you what would technically disobey, clearly, if they set up a new location. If they say, we're going to allow a new traditional mass over here, because that is specifically forbidden, quote, by the document, if it has valid effect. Okay, hope that answers that question as well. We've got a lot more here. Where we can so Lalo, I hope that's pronounced right, comes back. Would anyone sacrifice their faith if the Pope asked it? Because evidence is attending the Pauline rite results in loss of faith. And you're right. Essentially, this was the argument of Archbishop Lefebvre, fundamentally why you should not go to the new mass. It was not because it was not, if offered properly, valid. He said the problem is it's a danger to your faith. And he predicted in the 70s, continually going to the new mass will put your faith at risk. And I think he's been proven true. Notice the diocesan bishops in the US who met in their conference last month said this. They're writing this document on the Blessed Sacrament, and they said it's because basically most Catholics don't believe in the real presence anymore. I mean, thank you, Archbishop Lefebvre, point proven, right? History has proven him right, that continual use of the new mass destroys faith in primarily the real presence and the sacrificial nature of the Mass. And so you're absolutely right. If the Pope ordered you to put your faith at risk, say, go do something that will put your faith at risk, you would not have to obey. And essentially, if you understand that going to the new Mass puts your faith at risk, you say, I just cannot do that. The Pope cannot require me to do that. Jay Smith, how will the Vatican apply pressure to bishops who refuse to play along, i.e. Strickland, Paprocki, Corleone, etc.? Well, it's pretty clear now, because he says, and I love the contradiction of it, it's up to the diocesan bishop to make all decisions, but these are the only decisions you're allowed to make, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you must do this, you must do that. Right? It's the classic dictator, say one thing but really mean another. Innumerable ways, right? They can apply pressure. So number one, you have to resign. You're gone, or you're fired. I mean, look what happened to Cardinal Burke. Cardinal Burke spoke out against Pope Francis very early on. Within months, gone, fired. You get put off in a broom cupboard and can be the chaplain to the Knights of Malta and do nothing. So that real threat, which is not just theoretical with Francis, there's a whole long list of bishops who have been removed. Archbishop Vigano, right? He was retired immediately when he turned 75. And if you remember, when Pope Francis was asked about the Kim Davis affair, when Archbishop Vigano got permission to introduce him to Kim Davis, he said, that was all that nuncio's fault, and I've already fired him. Those were his words. I fired him. So again, I think bishops who the biggest pressure is, you'll be gone. You'll be sent to the outer hinterlands, and if you displease me. And that's the main pressure. And he's done it to enough bishops that they know it's a real threat. So I think that is the big threat on them to toe the line. Only valid popes are infallible, and only on matters of faith and morals. This is Ray Mack. Motu proprio is not a matter of faith and morals, but instead is a disciplinary, absolutely right, a disciplinary action. It is clearly a legal text. It is not, it meets none of the criteria for infallibility. He is not speaking on faith and morals, and so it clearly is far from the requirements for infallibility. Pressure will come from the USCCB, says Lalo. Absolutely right. In many ways, the Pope doesn't have to exert the pressure. That's the whole idea of collegiality, is to exert peer pressure, right? Hey, you don't want to break with the USCCB. You want to all get along. We got to stand together. Thankfully, there's a couple bishops that are willing to buck that. Bishop Strickland, for one, right, has been willing to criticize. I mean, this is incredible. In the post-conciliar era, criticized the Bishop of La Crosse for what he did to Father Altman. Again, very, very gently, but still did it. But you're right, that is not normal. Normally, it is the USCCB and got to be part of the club. Joshua Davis, next one. Do you think that Francis or individual bishops will strip the SSPX of sacramental faculties? Seems like that's the next step. My fiance and I are planning on getting married in SSPX in January. First of all, congratulations on your betrothal, your engagement. Wish you, having been married now 30 years, a few weeks ago, our 30th anniversary, I wish you every best in your marriage. Again, this is speculation, but I don't think so. And again, what do I think is going on? Because how do you reconcile this mystery that he hates tradition, but he gives all these nice things to the society, right? I think that this may be the master plan. And again, maybe it won't happen. I'm going to say it will happen. Lots of things can go on. But I think his first plan was nice to the society, tell everybody it's okay to go there, give them their, quote, legal niceties, so that people feel comfortable to go there, then come down with the hammer on the traditional mass so that more people will go there, right? So he can herd. And you see, that's why I use the word quarantine in a little thing for the video. I think the idea is to quarantine people, get them into little places. So in the diocese, get them into one place so you can stamp it out, or herd them into the society. More likely than revoke the faculties, you're saying, I think he's likely to make some statement, and he's already started it in that letter to the bishops. So he gets all the people who will not compromise in the society. He'll say, But don't worry, they're not in the church anyway. They're part of that schismatic movement. I don't think, this is my personal opinion, I don't think he'll actually issue a decree, a formal decree, which is they never did to Lefebvre or them before, right? They always just would say, "Oh, it's a schism and it's schismatic." It's kind of, but they never formally did it because they knew they couldn't. They just said it, right? Just in passing it a letter, like he did, just asserted it without proof or without canonical process. I think that's a possibility, distinctly. I think he might do that. Maybe he would revoke the things he gave, but maybe not. To be honest, if he does or doesn't, it really doesn't matter. The society was absolving sins, was marrying people for, whatever it is, 30, 40, almost 40 years before Francis came along. And under necessity, the law grants permission, right? The law is meant for our salvation. And when we have a physical or moral necessity, the technicalities of the law are dispensed. And there's a good canonical study on that was published by Father Anglès on supplied jurisdiction. We don't have time to get into all of it, but I would say to you, whatever happens between now and January, and I don't think it would happen that quickly. I think this is a couple-year game plan. You would still be able to get married in this is by a society priest under the old supplied jurisdiction. And right now, even under those faculties, there are bishops that are saying you can't do the wedding. They ask, they go through the law, but when the bishop is unjust, they rely on it. Okay, Ray Mack. Now, if you're a schismatic German or divisive on teaching, you get the synodal way. But if you're a traditionalist, you get told it's their way or the highway. I think great observation. The hypocrisy is insane here, right? You can be the German synodal way, dividing the church into schism, and there's no threat to unity there. You can be Father James Martin, being divisive on teachings of the church, and you get a congratulatory letter saying keep doing what you're doing. I mean, this is just more evidence that this law is of no force in effect, right? That there is just no way this can be a valid law when the utter hypocrisy, the reason he gives is just utterly flaunted by every other behavior, right? Those people who are truly sowing division in the church, the German bishops, for example, are congratulated, and traditionalists are, quote, punished. So great observation. Layla again, blackmail, bullying, ostracism, agreed. Maca 562, can a pope excommunicate the SSPX for rejecting the new mass? Again, we have to work on that word. Legally, can he do it with validity where it actually takes effect? No, right? I mean, quo primum itself says no priest can be told you can't use this mass, or you must use another missal. And again, so he gave that guarantee for all times. And so again, there. And again, how can you say, I can excommunicate you for saying a mass that every canonized saint up until 1962 said exclusively? It's just not possible. You can only be excommunicated for a crime against the faith. And how can adhering to a mass said by every saint and said for virtually 2,000 years, can you be excommunicated for? Now, can he purport to do it? Absolutely, yes. I mean, he can say whatever he wants to say, but it has no legal effect. I mean, think of it this way. Here's an analogy. So what if you are totally innocent of a crime? I think St. Thomas More. He's accused of a crime of treason against the king. He's brought into a court. The jury is bribed, threatened, cajoled, and they declare him guilty. Did that judgment take legal effect? Is he guilty of treason? Absolutely not. Could they say it? Yes. Did they execute him? Yes. But it was an unjust execution, which is of no legal effect, right? So when he got to his particular judgment, God didn't say, hey, you committed the crime of treason, the sin of treason, which is also a sin. He said, no, you were a martyr for the faith, as the church confirmed. So again, when you say can he claim it? Can he attempt to persecute them, as Archbishop Lefebvre was persecuted with calumnies, with saying things? Absolutely, they can. But as Archbishop Lefebvre, we account these penalties as nothing. They are just persecutions. Just like St. Thomas More was condemned to death, but he was not. That did not make him guilty. Good question. Amy, where was that? I don't want to skip anyone here. Amy Francesca, if the result in one's diocese is no available TLM, are we morally justified in not assisting at Mass on Sunday? If we believe attending a Novus Ordo would endanger our children's faith, are we justified? Short answer, yes, although I'd modify, even if you don't have any children, your own faith would be justified. So again, children obviously makes it even more complex, but even your own. Now, again, if you're interested in this, my video from the Catholic Family News Conference gives a much more detailed answer, an hour-long answer. Please watch that if you want. But the short answer is, again, if you know what Mary or Amy Francesca has said, I say there are people who are going to New Mass who are just not aware of this. They haven't received the grace to see this as a danger to their faith. I'm not saying that they're doing something subjectively wrong, right? They shouldn't go because their faith's a danger, but they're not morally responsible for that. They don't know. They've not been given the grace to see it. I'm only talking, as I think you are, about people who know this. So if you know that the Novus Ordo is a danger to your faith, and again, more and more people are realizing that these days, and if you do, then yes, you are excused if there is no way to get to a Mass that does not endanger your faith, right? So remember, there are two rules. There's the third commandment, no exceptions, divine law. You must honor Sunday. So you can't just say, I can't go to Mass, I'm just going to party all day, right? You must honor God in some way. The theologians had always said, if you can't get to Mass, you need to spend at least the amount of time you would at a low Mass. So at least an hour doing something devotional, saying the rosary, reading the Mass readings, doing what you can to honor God for at least an hour, maybe listening to a sermon, reading a spiritual reading. But the precept to hear Mass on Sunday is of human origin. It's not of divine law. Divine laws honor the Sabbath. The church said the way you should do that is by going to Mass on Sunday. All human laws are capable of exception when necessity requires. So the church has always and everywhere taught, canon law says, if you have a physical or moral impediment, and it says physical or moral, physical, you're sick, your car breaks down, right? You are not committing a sin, you are excused. But it also says a moral impediment. So moral means you would put your faith at risk. It would put you in moral danger to go there. You are excused. Now, but maybe there is a TLM somewhere in the world, right? So what has been the advice of theologians, again, pre-conciliar, traditional theologians, on like, what does it mean to have an impediment? So what if my car breaks down, but I can walk 10 minutes. Well, then you'd have to go, unless you obviously have a broken leg and can't walk. But what they said in the modern era with cars is that if you were in a remote location, you were somewhere where you'd have to drive more than an hour, then you could consider that an impediment to get there. So if there's no Mass without a moral problem to it, within an hour, then you were excused. And that was, again, a rule of thumb, because we're dealing with what constitutes an impediment. Would in the modern era where driving's a little easier, I don't know. Would just say maybe, an hour and a half. I think the point is, if it is a reasonable thing to get to a Mass, to have to make an extra effort, then maybe you should. But certainly if it is beyond that, you certainly are free to go to make a longer drive. If you could drive, and I've known people who've driven 5 hours, 4 hours to sometimes get to a Mass. That's extraordinary. That's going above and beyond, and certainly commendable, but not required. So I think, yes, you are justified as long as you continue to honor the Sabbath, the Lord's Day, Sunday, in some appropriate way. Thank you for that. So Dean Leo 16. Doesn't this document violate my religious liberty as defined by Vatican II? Yeah, again, the hypocrisies here are laughable. Great comment, right? Obviously, it says in Vatican II, Digitatis Humanae, that the human conscience is everything, and you cannot pass a law, right, preventing someone from exercising in private or in public their religious belief. Well, this is your religious liberty, but this is the last lesson of it at Vatican II. Religious liberty is good for everybody that's not Catholic, but not good for you. An analogy I'll tell you, I've heard from students all over the country and faculty and staff who work for Catholic universities who are imposing vaccine mandates on people. They have said, vaccine mandate, but we will give a religious exemption for everybody except Catholics. And these are Catholic universities. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon or anything else, you get a religious exemption if you want one, but not Catholics. So the hypocrisy is just unbelievable. Dean Barker, some happy faces there. Father David M. Chiantella, welcome, Father. Laudato Jesus Christus. Greetings and peace. Greetings to you, Father. Thank you for joining us. I haven't met you before, but thank you. Matthew Joseph, Father David M. I pray for all those who toil in our Lord's vineyard. Great, thank you as well. Catherine Sarto, great answers. Thank you. Matthew Joseph, gladly. As a last resort, go to Novus Ordo and offer it up. And thank you, Order of Sanctity. I would disagree with that. Again, doing something and offer it up is something which is virtuous when the thing yourself you're doing is not a danger to your faith or is not something that is harmful morally. So let me give you an example where I would agree with you. So there's the priest at your local traditional Latin mass is a horrible singer. He just doesn't have the gift for singing. And so when he's singing a mass, it's really grating, right? It's just not pleasing, right? That's something where I'd say, look, going to that mass is good. It's good for you in and of itself. And just offer up the fact that the priest doesn't sing very well, right? He's doing his best. I would agree with you, because his bad singing isn't a moral danger to your faith. It may be, unpleasant, but it's not. And that's where I agree with you. But again, if you understand, as I do, and I think, if you don't agree with this, I understand that. But if you say the Novus Ordo is a danger to your faith, or it is offensive to God, something I think God, when he says, I want to be worshiped worthily, and you don't do it, that is an offense to God, and you don't want to be a part of that, right? Then I think you don't just say, I'm going to do this and offer it up, right? And again, some people say, well, going to a new mass is like being Our Lady at the foot of the cross. I don't think it's a really good analogy, because when you go to a new mass and participate in it, right? You don't just, you go and you're saying, I'm going to mass. I am being a part of this. Our Lady didn't say, hey, let me join with you soldiers, right? I'm going to go, I'm going to go participate in this. She stood with our Lord, but she did not associate herself with the evil that was going on at that point. So it's just sort of going there. Now, again, where I think you can kind of maybe analogous be with the Blessed Mother, and this I would understand, is for a grave reason. So you have a family member who's died, who you want to go to their funeral, and you really should, or it would be a sin against charity. Then again, I think, and the best advice I got from priests is you can go, but you cannot participate. You cannot be part of the mass. You cannot make responses. You should not go to communion, obviously. And just sort of like you would if you had a Protestant relative who died and you needed to go into their Protestant church, as the church always taught. Okay, you can be present passively, but you cannot in any way give an impression of participating. And again, you're not going to mass if that's what you're doing. So if you're sort of scrupulizing, I want to fulfill my obligation, to go and be passive is not going to mass. And again, I think that is okay. It's still a danger to your faith, but it's, I think, an acceptable, limited, how many times do you have to do that in your life, out of charity for your family or close relatives. But again, I don't think to just say, well, to go to mass on Sunday, offer it up. So I'm sorry, I do disagree, Order of Sanctity. Mary Vigil, how often does the Novus Ordo ordain bishops? Will the FSSP be given their own bishop? How often, whenever the Pope wants to appoint a new bishop, is the answer to your first question. He just can decide, new bishop. It happens, whenever, usually when they need an extra auxiliary bishop in a diocese or a bishop retires, etc. As the FSSP, I think the answer is never. Not only because of this motu proprio. So if you remember the history of the founding of the Fraternity of St. Peter, 1988, several priests who belonged to the side of St. Pius X had qualms of conscience about the consecrations. And again, objectively, I think they were permissible. I think it was a necessity, but I understand it was an extraordinary act in the history of the church. And some of the priests said, I don't know if I can do this. So they broke with Archbishop Lefebvre. They went to the Vatican, and the Vatican said to them, if you want to form your own group, we will give you the same deal we were going to give Archbishop Lefebvre. Because if you remember, in May of that year, the Vatican said, we will give you your own bishops. We'll set everything up. And Lefebvre didn't accept it because he thought the Vatican was lying and was never going to give him a bishop. He said, I worry that they know I'm going to die, and they'll say, I promise you a bishop, but they'll never really do it, and then I'll die. Well, to be honest, I think history has vindicated him, because the fraternity was given that same, they were told, you can have the protocol we offered Archbishop Lefebvre, which promised a bishop. So that was 1988. We are now 33 years later. and they've never been given a bishop. They've never been ordained their own bishop. So to be honest, Mary, I think if they've never been given a bishop under Benedict XVI, who was very favorable toward them, he was very embraced them, but he never gave them a bishop. There is no way they're going to get a bishop now. And I think that's one of the ways to choke them off. Like I said, I think this whole document is meant to try to choke tradition, quarantine it, and then kill it. If you kill the bishop, if there's no bishop to ordain priests, then eventually the priests die out. And I think there will be pressure on bishops, I think, to not ordain fraternity priests. Not just fraternity, any other group. They don't have a bishop. So they have to find a bishop all the time willing to ordain them. There have been, for the last 33 years, several bishops willing to. I think pressure will be brought on them to stop. So I don't see how they ever get a bishop, to be honest, under current circumstance. Catherine Sarto. So an unjust law is no law at all and needn't be followed. Yes. St. Thomas Aquinas, first part of the second part of the Summa, question 96, article 4. An unjust law is no law at all, but in fact an act of violence. And he says, he makes a distinction though, we don't have to follow it, we're not obligated to follow it, but for certain unjust laws, we might be allowed, not required, but permitted to sort of go along with it, as long as going along with it is not a danger to our faith or an offense against God. So just real quick example, maybe there's an unjust tax that is so unjust that we don't have to pay it. But if we don't pay it, we might get thrown in prison. So we might say, okay, here's your money. I want to avoid prison. Even though we're permitted to conform to the law, we're not obligated. But if it's a law, you must worship a false god, then we're not even permitted to obey it, even though we're not obligated. And again, I would put forcing you to go to the new mass in that category, because it's not just like, okay, it's unfair for me to pay all these exorbitant unjust taxes, but it's not a direct offense to actually pay money. I can make a donation to the government if I want. So yes, that is St. Thomas Aquinas's constant teaching. Maria Orestes, new comment. Doctor, I was talking with your son this morning. He was at my chapel. Oh, well, tell him I said hello. Thank you. My son, for those who don't know, is a deacon ordained last month, and he's in Miami this week, helping our father. God bless you. God bless your family. Thank you for that. Tell my son I said hello. Thomas Keller, what is the SSPX position on the orca? I'm not sure what the orca means. The whale? So maybe, Thomas, you can write in. I'm not sure what your question means on the ORCA. After the French Revolution, this is IRIS, didn't good priests give communion? Sorry, I had to scroll down, and so I lost it. Where are you? Sorry, I lost your, got covered up. Okay, after the French Revolution, didn't good priests give communion, although it was not considered valid at the time, but it proved right and necessary? So maybe what you're referring to, I'm not sure, by good priests, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but there may have been priests who refused to accept the revolution because they had to swear an oath to the revolution. And the non-juring priests were the ones who wouldn't swear an oath to the revolution. Well, some of the bad bishops who joined the revolution did enact measures against them, said you're punished, you can't give out the sacraments, and the good priests just met in the forests and did it anyway. So if that's what you're referring to, mostly in the Vendée, yes, that's true. There were bishops who invalidly, unjustly took away their rights to administer the sacraments, but the true good priests were the ones who wouldn't accept the revolution. And again, the church commended them for staying with the faithful. So I think that's what you're referring to, but if so, that's my answer. Karen Albanese German. Does the document put out yesterday state that a TLM Mass may not be celebrated at a church, but needs to be off-site and not parochial? Will that apply to established TLM Mass parishes tomorrow? So again, what the document says is the bishop may designate a place in the diocese where a TLM can happen. So you've got kind of two permissions. You have to authorize a priest and you would designate a place. But the document specifically says that place may not be a parochial church. So it cannot be a church that is a canonical parish. So that means it can be any other place. Now, that means literally they could say you can use the park, but it doesn't mean it can't be any church, what we might call a church building or a chapel building. So, for example, you might have a religious community that has a church, a chapel, a Franciscan monastery that has a chapel, but is not a parish, right? You might have a Benedictine abbey that is a church, but is not a parish. So technically, the document doesn't forbid allowing those places, right, that are churches but not parishes. And to be a parish, you have to be canonically established. So it actually says, as of today, right, that the bishop has to designate a place that is not a parish. Now, again, what's ambiguous, what if a bishop has already designated a parish? Technically, the document seems to say that's invalid. He has to designate a new place. Will bishops just not do anything? I don't know. But I think reading the text, I think they have to find a place that is not a parish, right? Could be a hospital chapel. Could be a Catholic funeral home that has a chapel in it. Could be a hospital chapel, right? Any of those are possible. So it could be a quote unquote church, but what it specifically says can't be a canonical church. It also says you cannot create a new what's called personal parish, if you're familiar with that. And you got to decide whether to suppress the ones you have. So again, I hope that answers your question there. There's so many comments. I think when I scroll down, it kind of jumps up. Okay, Thomas Joseph at Thomas Keller the Orca. Okay, I don't know what that is. Father Johnson, who's your pastor? I assume that's. I think that's directed to me. I'm not sure, Father. I am in. Seeing me from my home in Florida. So the prior at the priory here is Father Marc Vanois is the prior here. James Bond. If at some point all traditional Catholics are declared schismatic, how do you think we would carry on? We would carry on. to say simply, we would just do what we're doing. Again, I think it would be an invalid declaration, and we would just do what we're doing. We would just keep doing what we're doing. Just like when Archbishop Lefebvre was declared suspended in 1976, he just continued doing what he's doing. And as we heard James Vogel's address from the Roman Forum 2 weeks ago, he told the story. He said, so remember what happened in 76? The Vatican said, oh, by the way, Site of St. Pius X, gone, doesn't exist anymore. Just like yesterday, Francis said the traditional mass doesn't exist anymore. It's not part of the Roman rite. And Archbishop Lefebvre, you're suspended. You can't ordain priests. Then they sent a bishop, Cardinal Gagnon, to visit a cone, and he participated in ordinations to the minor orders, which also Paul VI said didn't exist. So Paul VI said, there's no minor orders. You're not a group. You don't have a seminary. You can't ordain. And then a cardinal comes and sits in full crier dress, attaining ordinations by a group that doesn't exist, by a bishop that he said is told isn't allowed to do anything, ordaining orders that Paul VI said don't exist anymore. And nobody had a problem with this. So again, we would just carry on and we just count it as nothing because it's invalid. At Matthew Joseph, because it's invalid. At Matthew Joseph, saddle the orca. Okay. I'm missing your joke if it's a joke. Francis is a communist. I don't know if he's a communist. He certainly is the best friend communists have ever had. Again, I don't know what he believes. And frankly, I heard Bishop Flay, I had lunch with him in April, and he said to me, you can't say he is this, he is that, because frankly, he said he doesn't care about coherent beliefs. So he doesn't believe in principles. He just believes in doing what he wants to do at the time. And so he has no coherent system, right? If you say you're a communist, you have a coherent system. He doesn't have a coherent system because he believes in sort of whatever he wants to do at the moment, was Bishop Flay's take. So again, I don't think he's a communist. I think he's Francis. I think he is unique. I think he's Jorge Marie Bergoglio, and whatever beliefs or principles will help him, he has at the time. But he's certainly the best friends communists have ever had. Joey Puval. Can I attend a Novus Ordo done by a traditionally minded holy priest? Ad Orientem, communion on the tongue, at the altar rail, Gregorian chant, TLM is not available. Again, it's certainly less aesthetically troubling. It's less sort of sense from your census point of view, the things you described, less troubling. But remember the Adiavani intervention, the Roman theologians ruling on the new mass. What they were studying was the Latin mass in Latin, the Novus Ordo in Latin. It would not even yet been translated, never been offered yet. So it was offered ad orientem. It was everything you say. And they said this in its text is a radical break from the Council of Trent. So the point is, all those smells and bells being there, there are still the omissions, the omission of an offertory, the omission of mentions of sacrifice, the slights against the Blessed Mother by her being omitted, and so all those things are still present. Now, again, I think traditionally minded priests, I don't think we say like be harsh on them. They're learning, they're moving towards tradition. And I think it's great if they start doing that. Many people, I did, before we found the traditional mass, we had gone to a priest that was doing very what we call reverent, you might call, to summarize your points, reverent novus ordos. It often is a gateway for people to eventually find the truth. So I think, don't go around denouncing people who this go to these or offer these. I think it can be a good transition to say, wait, it's kind of like her Bishop Vigano said, more or less, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but to Father Claude Bart, like people who want to fix up the traditional mass, add this, add that, do communion on the tongue, all the things they want to change to it, by the end they'll go, oh wait, we just went back to the traditional mass. The logical extension is, why are we adding all this stuff when it's already there? And just go do that. So again, I would say to somebody who knows, who's looked at the new mass, sees its grave deficiencies, then no, even if it's a dressed up, and he uses the example, you can read it on our website, called Claude Bart. If you went into the Paul VI, that hideous audience hall, and beautifully decorated it with Baroque stucco on the ceilings, it would still be the Paul VI ugly hall, right? You're just dressing up something that at its root is problematic. I had one diocesan priest or former religious priest friend in Europe who said, doing all that to Novus Ordo is like putting lipstick on a pig. Looks better, but it's still a pig, right? It was an exaggeration in a sense, but I think if you really know what's in the new rite, no, even if those things are there, I don't think you're obligated. You're not obligated to go to it. Do you think this will affect the SSPX? Certainly no, they will not do anything different than they've done before. They will just, like I said, this doesn't affect us. They'll carry on, excommunicate us, do whatever you want, give us your best shot, as they've done for the last 40 years, 50 years. They'll just keep doing what they're doing. It may affect them, I think, in a certain sense. I think there are faithful and priests who may now say, okay, enough's enough. This is now so obvious, and petition to join them. There's already been a good solid stream, I think it's more than a trickle, of priests coming to the SSPX to either officially join them or say, can I be associated with you? I'm going to say mass here. Can I be what's often called a friend of the society or an associate? So they already have a group of people. They say, look, but priests the priest is not good to be alone, right? Not just Adam. Any of us is not good to be alone. And priests more than ever need help, right? They are alone. They've taken a vow of celibacy and they need help, right? So if you're a priest on your own and you've been punished by your bishop, you've got a group of faithful, you're taking care of them, priests need to go on retreat. They need to take a few weeks to care for their own soul, but they don't want to abandon their faithful, right? If you're the only priest there, you go, what do I do? I need to go on retreat for my own spiritual benefit. So often these associated priests of the society, that's what they do. They say, well, look, will you send a priest to substitute for me when I need to get a week or two a year to rejuvenate my spiritual soul? I need to meet other priests. Can I come to your priest meetings? Can I come to your priest retreats? Can I go to a conference with? And they often have priests that are like this, that are associated. They don't want to canonically be under them because they have a group of people they're taking care of. I think there's going to be a vast increase in those priests, and also priests who canonically, legally say, I want to actually join. I want to sign on the dotted line, become a priest subject to your superiors. I think there's going to be more of those. And I think the fear, if I were Father Pegliarani, which I'm not, obviously, but if I were the head, I'd be sitting in Menzingen now worried. How are we going to deal with the influx? Because there's going to be a huge increase. We already saw an increase of lay faithful here in Florida, 50 to 100% new during COVID. Why? And I think this is as dramatic as COVID. When all the Novus Ordo churches shut down and the only ones open in Florida were one or two here or there and the Society of St. Pius X, 50 to 100% more people started coming, depending on the chapel in the area of Florida. Because people said, okay, they're going to shut my mass. I was a little worried about you SSPX priests, but I'm coming. And they've stayed even when their churches have opened because they realized all these rumors about SSPX priests, they're mean, they're nasty. They realized were not true. So I think it's in a sense going to be a problem for the SSPX, and they're going to be overwhelmed with new new people that they just don't have the. I mean, if 1,000 priests showed up and said we want to join your priories, they don't have a place to put them right now. It's interesting. 10 years ago, when I saw Bishop Fillet at the Angelus press conference, I did a little interview for the Remnant, and I asked him, if you could have one thing, what would it be? If you could ask God for one thing, what would it be? And he said, 50 more priests immediately, because he said, I worry about the day when the conciliar church will collapse and we will be overrun with people because there'll be nowhere else to go. And I think he prophetically was talking about our times. I think it was somewhat COVID, but I think it could be this. And I think he was worried. He said, what will we do with these people? Again, they'll, if you increase that many people, how do you take care of them? So that's my take on what it could mean. So again, Adele, not affected in, I think, the way you mean. It won't stop them, but I think it will affect them in a certain way. Can SSPX make more bishops? Okay, what do we mean by can? To consecrate a bishop, you need two bishops, a main consecrator and a co-consecrator. So as long as they have two bishops, and many may not know this, Archbishop Lefebvre had a co-consecrator, Bishop de Castro Meyer, from Brazil, who came up to a cone and was the co-consecrator. So as long as they have two bishops, either one of their own and one other, a friendly bishop who's willing to help them, maybe Archbishop Vigano, I don't know. But they have three bishops currently. They certainly can. They have the power to. Legally, again, it gets back to 1988. Is it a necessity? And I think the bishops are very careful about this. Again, they are not flippant about canon law. They believe when it's a necessity, you do it, but only when it's a necessity, right? You don't say, yeah, it would be more convenient. We have to travel a lot. It'd be easier if we had 5 bishops. Let's just do it. They don't do that because, again, the test is it necessary? So frankly, I don't think they would legally say they have a just cause to do it until it were necessary. And what by necessary? They're down to 2 bishops, and so there's a risk they couldn't continue. Or they are, like I said, so overwhelmed with faithful and seminarians and that it's just physically impossible. And again, they're getting stretched right now. I mentioned my lunch with Bishop Fillet in April. I asked him how he likes living in Virginia. He's recently taken up his new residence in the seminary in Virginia. And he said, I don't know. I've not really been there. And he's been there, for a long time, since the summer, or since Christmas, I think he got there. But he literally flies out, does confirmations, comes back, spends a day or two, flies out, does confirmations. And again, they're all 3 of them are on the road. So I think they're stretched, but I don't think, as far as we know, to the point where they say it's physically impossible anymore. So I think once they make that prudential determination that we just can't do this anymore, I think they could legally then say there is a necessity. Odor of sanctity. Are FSSP priests ordained in future allowed to offer TLM? Or do they also require, again, permission of the bishop in Rome? Again, reading the document, it seems to say they even need permission, right? Because it says any priest. It doesn't say any priest ordained to a diocese or any priest other than those Ecclesia Dei communities. And he does know how to refer to them. He refers to them later, the communities established by Ecclesia Dei Commission. He doesn't accept them from it. So, a law, its plain text is any priest ordained after today. So I think the reading of it is clear. Now, maybe that'll sort itself out. Maybe the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life will say they have that permission on ordination. I don't know, but the document as of today doesn't seem to say they have it. It says they also need to go get permission. Now, who they get it from is kind of odd because they don't have a diocesan bishop that they are ordained for. So again, this was not well thought through, and I think that's because they don't care. They want to crush these groups. Remember what? Now, which card? I'm going to remember which cardinal was. I think it was. I don't have it in front of me, but one of the cardinals recently, it may have been Roche or the Archbishop who's the head of the CDW. I think it was. Gloria TV has this, said the traditional mass must be obliterated. All they care about is destroying it. Right. So these are questions where if you wanted it to survive, you'd say, wait, how does this work? They didn't think about that because they don't care. They don't want them to survive. And again, they're not going to succeed. Tradition will survive. But I don't think they answered your question because they don't care. And they just wrote it, just, crush it. Again, a strict reading of the document says they need it, but we'll see what happens. What specific part of the new mass is a danger to the faith and or an offense to God? Well, it's more than one. And again, I don't have time to give the whole lecture. I'd commend to you my 2019 lecture on Catholic Family News Channel, Is the New Mass Legitimate? And I go through multiple points. But essentially, the short answer is a sacrifice contains three elements: an offertory, a consecration, and a consumption, a complete consuming of the sacrament, of the victim, excuse me. The offertory is omitted. There is no offertory. Again, people refer to it, but it is not an offertory. There's no prayer of offertory. That is the most fundamental offensive part to God. The second main offensive part is the slighting, the omission of things due to God. So an evil is the omission of what is due to God, and there are so many omissions in the new mass that they rise to an offense to God. Again, that is not a complete answer, Byron Price. I refer you to my hour-long lecture to hear the rest of the details, but it is essentially from the omission standpoint. Now, obviously, there are more offenses. That's the basic offenses of the text. There are more offenses to God in practice in the Novus Ordo, number one being which communion in the hand, which commits sacrilege. Now, again, that's not everywhere. That's individual Novus Ordos, but the text itself, they're the two main points that are a danger to the faith and offensive to God. But see my lecture for further detail. Samperifi Doni, can you speak on the parish location aspect? Parochial parishes are extremely rare. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Parochial parishes is sort of an oxymoron. Parishes are parishes, maybe parochial churches, and they're not rare, as most parishes have a resident pastor. Is this as big of a deal as it made to be? Yes, and again, I'm not sure what you're referring to. A parish church, a parochial church, is a church that is erected as a parish, which means it has someone appointed to care for it, even if they're not a resident priest. And here's the real key: they keep canonical records. So sacramental records are kept there. So if sacramental records are not kept, it's not a parochial church. So I'm not sure the distinction you're drawing that are rare, but every church, so most church where you attend in your parish, unless it's like a Carmelite chapel, is a parochial church. Again, there's no such thing as a parochial parish. I'm not sure what you're referring to. And they're not rare. They are 99% of the churches in a diocese. What would not be a parish, again, might be a chapel set up for a Latin Mass group where they're allowed to go, that might be a chapel in a school, for example. So a school chapel would not be a parochial church. So yes, it is a big deal, because what they don't want is your average church down the street. They don't want there ever to be a traditional Mass there where somebody might wander in and see it, right? Nobody's going to wander in necessarily to a nursing home chapel, right? Okay, hope that answers your question. Joey Puval, follow up to my earlier question. Do you have a quick response, and can you lead me to another resource to explain how effective... Sorry, every time I get to the bottom of the screen, it jumps too far. And so I have to then scroll back up. Okay. Where are we? Okay. Do you have a quick resource? Could you lead me to another resource to explain how effectuating validity, Novus Ordo, does not equal worship pleasing to God? Again, please see my lecture, is where I go into a lot of detail and I give sources there. It's Is the New Mass Legitimate on the Catholic Family website. Listen to that, and I refer to other sources. So again, validity, real quickly though, is a sacrament valid? And again, a heretical priest, still a excommunicated, and I mean validly, really excommunicated priest, a bad priest who is punished, who is excommunicated, who validly consecrates a sacrament, who says the words of consecration, still has the power to consecrate. A laicized priest can technically still do that, because even though he's laicized, he still has the indelible mark, still has the power. But that is offensive to God, because he shouldn't be doing that, right? He is, in his state of heresy, is offensive to God. So again, that's the kind of distinction. A priest who's in mortal sin validly confects a sacrament, but he does so in a way that's offensive to God, because God's offended by that sacrilege. Now, if you don't have to scrupulize it. If you're attending Mass, you don't know that priest's in mortal sin. You're not offensive to God there. It's just an analogy. But there are the kinds of distinctions between validity and whether it's a good thing that's pleasing to God. But again, please see my lecture, and I do refer to some books and things that you can uh, get you some more resources. MRS, and they never got a bishop. I think you're confirming what I said. Triple F Farm Studio, Kim Fraser. I live in Alaska. Don't drive, but my husband does. So we travel an hour to Mass. However, my husband isn't so comfortable with the Latin Mass, but has agreed to go every other Sunday. What do I do? Um, Again, I I think, well, first of all, pray for your husband, as all spouses should do. We are each the means to our own sanctification. I'd be grateful to him for agreeing to go at least every other um, Sunday. Again, I wouldn't, my personal prudential advice, I wouldn't beat him like, come on, you got to go, you're in sin. Don't. Again, lovingly encourage him. And I think getting him to go at all is, the every other month, and let God's grace work. By going to that Mass, he is receiving God's grace, going every other Sunday. And eventually, unless he puts up an obstacle to it, unless he refuses it, it will work on him. And I've known so many people who've said, well, I don't really like this, it's not my thing, but I'll go for you, to a husband or wife, or to friend or relative, for your sake. And after sometimes different periods, weeks, months, they fell in love with it because it's the right thing. And again, the only thing I might say to him, and again, you prudentially how to do it, it's not about whether you're comfortable with it or you like it, right? It's about what is the right thing to do. And there's a story I've told before. There's a priest I knew who was traveling in Europe, and he stopped in London, and he had been to France to one of the traditional monasteries where they had only traditional mass and breviary, and he stopped at this conservative parish that they were kind of friendly to it, but they were with the new rite, and the priest, or I don't know if it was a priest or brother, said to him, "Oh, you were over at that place? Yeah, that's where they just love that traditional mass, and they just love it. It's good for that." And he said, "Actually, talking to the monks there, they don't always love it. Getting up at 3 a.m. singing matins in Latin sometimes is not their thing. Doesn't really do anything for them, but they know they're doing God's will and they're praising God the way He wants." And so, again, this is part of the modernist Vatican II error, that Mass is about how it makes us feel, right? What it does for us. Now, Mass is supposed to be efficacious for us, but that's its secondary effect, right? It's meant, hopefully, to do that, but that is not its primary aim. Its primary aim is to offer reparation to God, right, and worship God. And if it helps us, that's secondarily. Remember, the saints have always told us about the dark night of the soul, that many times we will pray and it'll do nothing for us. Saint Therese spent years of the dark night of the soul, Saint Teresa of Avila. And so prayer, nothing. I got nothing out of it. It does nothing for me. I'm not comfortable with it. But she said, you persevere through it. So I wouldn't lecture husband, but keep in mind, and maybe just subtly when you explain this to him, that it's not about whether you like it. It's about what's right and what's wrong. And if you understand that it's right, and if you can come to see that, then that's what you should do, even at times when it's not doing anything for you, for lack of a better word. So I'll pray for you, pray for your husband. And again, I think just the more he goes, and if you just help him to be open to the grace, God will reward it. The FSSP had to offer a pinch of incense to the Novus Ordo, Mise, in order to get their deal. And now we see that ABL was confirmed in his decision. So again, I think what you're was correct in his decision. Archbishop Lefebvre, sorry, ABL, Archbishop Lefebvre. And I think what you mean by that is, and as I explained in my video yesterday, the deal that was essentially, look, you can have your traditional mass, you can have your sort of traditional devotions, but implicitly you have to accept the council. So you don't have to promote it, but you have to never speak against it, and kind of maintain this détente. That was the deal. I think Francis has just changed the deal. So the incense used to be just sort of keep your mouth shut, more or less. Now it's going to be you have to affirmatively pray to the false god. I mean, using an analogy. And again, I think the Dijon case is what's to come for bishops who want to do this. You must offer a new mass. You must concelebrate. You must have at least, if you're going to have a traditional mass on Sunday, you have to have a Novus Ordo after it, or later in the day or earlier. I think that's what's coming for some Institute of Christ the King, some fraternity places, depending on the bishop. And if they say no, they'll say you're out of here, just like Dijon. So I think you're right. The deal has been swapped out from under them. Thank you. Glad that answered your question. Lashade X says, pray, good bishops allow for home chapels like the Mexicans and Spanish had before. Pray. I don't think many bishops, the bishops we're worried about, are not going to do that. The ones, the good bishops might. SSPX bishops, this is from Lashade X. SSPX bishops consecrating home mass kits. People should buy vestments. Again, I said this yesterday, stock up on things to have because again, some priests may need to go underground in the really bad dioceses, in the dioceses where they're going to get oppressive. Just like in China, there's some places where the communists really crack down, others where they kind of let you alone for a while. You never know when it's going to strike there. Again, that's our job. Gather the material things you need. Go on eBay, buy up some old altar cards, get a place set up in your home. Once I went to St. Edmund's Ware, and they have an example there, what's like a sideboard for your dining room. It was the most beautiful, clever thing designed. Looks like a China type cabinet, a sideboard, a buffet, but it opens up and turns into an altar. This is what people build for their homes in that. And I think, again, not everywhere, depending where you live, you may have diocesan priests particularly, or fraternity priests who are going to have to go underground. And what we can do is, set up places for them. So I agree with your comment. We should be prepared. Do you not think that Francis, this is from Paul Perla, interpreted this with his modernist cabal, implemented this as common law out of fear because TLM faith stands directly opposed to his Gnostic environmentalism, New World Order agenda? Yes, 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 I agree. He's afraid of it. They're all afraid of it. They're quaking in their boots. Why? Because they see if you let tradition free, and this is what Archbishop Lefebvre said. Remember his expression to Cardinal Ratzinger, give the experiment of tradition a chance, see what happens. And that's all he wanted. He just said, just let us alone, just let us do our thing and see what happens. Try the experiment of tradition. Because he knew if you do, it'll explode. The only people left will believe in it. And that's what's been happening gradually over the years. I think COVID accelerated it because people saw that the establishment for what it was. They just abandoned them. The shepherds abandoned them mostly, and there's a few exceptions. Most bishops shut them down. And they said, whoa, tradition is it. And it was not only the SSPX. There was some brave fraternity institute people who stayed open and just did it. Commend them. And again, I think they're scared out of their mind because I think COVID was a glimpse of the collapse of the Novus Ordo Church. Everybody would run and it'd just be nobody left. And they're opening their churches and there's hardly anybody going anymore. Yes, I think they're afraid. The only reason you quarantine and stamp it out is because it's a danger in the sense that it is in the way of your agenda, just like the communists want to stamp out Christianity in China because it's a danger. Pyron Price, would it be better to attend an ordinariate or Eastern Catholic liturgy than the Novus Ordo? Generally, yes. I don't know much about the ordinariate, I will be honest, so I don't want to speak to that. I know it's kind of a new thing. Their liturgy was supposed to be more traditional. I haven't studied it enough to really give an informed opinion on it. So I can't answer you because I don't want to speak on something I'm not really familiar with. So I haven't really looked at their new liturgy that's supposed to be based on the Sarum Rite. Eastern rites, generally yes, in that they are generally more traditional but not all of them. And you have to be a little careful with Eastern rites because some of them, the Vatican went in and hatcheted them and made a Novus Ordo of those. Some they tinkered a little bit, not completely. So again, as long as they're Eastern Catholic, they're not Eastern schismatic Orthodox. Yes, I think that certainly are acceptable. And I think, again, I think if you had one available within an hour drive and nothing else, no traditional Latin Mass, that I think you probably would want to go to fulfill your Sunday obligation. Mostly. Again, I don't think I can generalize all Eastern rites because there are a few they did really hatchet on and make like the Novus Ordo. But most of them, I think, and again, I'm not familiar with all, but I think most of the Byzantine and Ukrainian, for example, are traditional Eastern rites. Now, again, people who are canonically sort of nitpicky, you're not supposed to do that. Canon law, if you're a Latin Rite Catholic and you're baptized in the Latin Rite, you're not supposed to regularly go to Eastern Rite, not supposed to switch rites unless it's a necessity, right? So if you were traveling in Greece, and the only place to go is a necessity. So again, by even going to an Eastern Rite church, you're admitting there's a crisis in the church because under canon law, and you're admitting a necessity, you shouldn't be going even there if you have a local church that you can go to. So again, if there's a traditional Latin Roman Rite Mass, same distance as Eastern Rite. If you are born and baptized into the Latin Rite, you should go there. But if that's not an option for you, look into the Eastern Rite. Again, maybe consult a good priest who can look into it for you. But generally, those I think some of them at least are certainly not a danger to the faith in any way. And again, I'm not saying the ordinature is. I just haven't studied it enough. Le Shade X Umbrade. It seems like we are going through the crucifixion. Just like Christ, the Catholics will be seen as criminals, schismatics. Our Lord was crucified like a criminal, just as Bishop Schneider said. Absolutely right. There's a great remnant article from many, many years ago. It's republished from time to time by Solange Hirsch called The Passion of the Church, where the church is going through the crucifixion. It's a wonderful article. If you can get a hold of it, see if the remnant still has it online. I don't know if they do, or contact them. Solange, Solange Hertz, Hertz, I think it's spelled. Wonderful woman. Beautiful article, and exactly what you say. Remember what our Lord told the apostles. There's a time coming when they will throw you out of the synagogues, when they will persecute you and think they are doing a service to God. We live in one of those times. It is the church's passion. Agreed. And Alameda David Vigilante. Who will financially support our schism in the U.S.? Hard to carry on if suddenly there are expenses that used to be paid by the Novus Ordo establishment. And again, I think schism in quotes. We are not advocating a schism. We are not schismatic. And Archbishop Lefebvre always said it. I am not. Now, again, by the way, what that means is we are falsely called. We are falsely accused of that. Our going underground, as I would say, our preserving the faith underground. Who will pay? We will. And again, don't let that scare you. People have done this for the last 50 years. In the 70s, you don't need that much, right? If you've got a group of 20 people, 20 families get together, you don't need to buy the most beautiful mass vestments, right? Get what you can get, and you got to support a priest, right? They don't need that much, right? They are willing. If you've got a good priest, they're willing to, again, they don't need to be housed at the Ritz-Carlton. Don't overestimate it. And again, all that expense you're talking about is oftentimes the corruption of the bureaucracy, right? Think of the millions that the Vatican sent to these horrible causes, the millions that the USCCB send to these causes that support abortion, Planned Parenthood overseas. You don't have any of that overhead, right? Supporting a priest in a little group of families, you can do it. So don't let it intimidate you. If the poor Catholics of England could support recusant priests, we can do it in a much more affluent time. Again, it's priest food, a roof over their head. If somebody's got a spare room, an apartment over their garage, you can do it. And all the families chip in to cook, to feed the priest, pay their medical expenses. You can buy a simple mass kit, all the things you need quickly. Long story, but a chapel in a place we used to live was ransacked, and tradition carried it on. We had nothing. In a matter of a week, we got everything we needed for Mass. People appeared out of nowhere, things from their attics. We put together with very little expense everything we needed for a sung Mass in less than a week. It's a long story, but you can do it. Don't let it intimidate you. Latin Mass is the future, yes. Shade X takes away from the sacrifice, more like a Protestant. Again, I think you're helping to answer the questions. You can all read that because we've been a long time. I don't want to keep you too long, but yes, agree. Good answer. See my video for the longer one. New Mass, radical innovation, yes. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions before we try to wrap this up. So here's it looks like a question from Martin Sejka. I'm sorry, am I pronouncing your name wrong? Why some people present JP2 as defender of traditional right, when in fact he saw it as a problem? Si quant annos. Yes, by the way, it was JP2 who did not allow traditional right in parish churches. Yes, again, I think he tolerated it. And I think Francis is right. He did see it as transitional. He said, look, this will just keep people happy, stop them from following Lefebvre, but we don't really, this isn't the future. He wanted to keep it, a little more open door, but again, he wasn't promoting it. And that's true. But again, what he did had good effects, and some people found the mass because of it. But absolutely right. Luther, yes, Lutheran is closer to is Luther closer to the traditional mass than the Novus Ordo. Compare the text. Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer has more common texts with the traditional Latin Mass than the Novus Ordo, both on the Lutheran original rite and the Book of Common Prayer. You're absolutely right. And again, there's some good books comparing that. It's one by a lady in England. His name escapes me. That has the Book of Common Prayer and the Novus Ordo and the traditional Mass, all three columns comparing. Oh, I can picture her. I can't believe I can't remember her name. It was a nice hardback book that she published in England, but you can find some resources that compare those. Eucharist SSP Max is valid, correct, absolutely. Attending SSPX fulfills Sunday obligation, absolutely. Yes, yes, and yes. They are validly ordained priests. So when we get to the minimal question of valid, they are ordained. Nobody doubts they are ordained by bishops with apostolic succession. And yes, even again for decades, even the Vatican said it fulfills the Sunday obligation, right? And in fact, remember, the Vatican now says going to a schismatic, I wouldn't recommend it. And the church has always said you shouldn't do it. But they're actually saying if you go to a schismatic Eastern Orthodox, it fulfills your Sunday obligation. Again, so if they tell you it doesn't, they're contradictory. God bless Bishop Fillet, yes. So we have from Stephen Dennis. Step, you are correct. The Mass has always been valid. Fulfill Sunday, yes, okay. And again, we've been on a while, so I'm just looking for questions if I can see some through the comments. Great comments. Again, I'm not going to read them all because we're definitely been on a long time. Italians bishops, yes, they definitely wanted it. Oh, adjust your camera. Sorry, it's I guess a little. Sorry, I just saw that. I'm reading, so I'm not really looking at the camera. He's looking for more questions. He does not call himself that. Again, let's not make a lot of it, but it is interesting. He doesn't sign anything more PP, Pope. He doesn't sign Bishop of Rome. He just signs Francis. Again, I don't think, let's not run with that. It doesn't mean he's not the Pope, but it's sort of interesting that he doesn't do that. The Orco is the obedient apex predator of the sea. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. What that means. Good faith, looking for questions. Not seeing any more. Again, I commend the comments to you, the good comments people are making, but there's just so many here. And I'm not seeing any more questions. Open your home to good priests, second that. Sorry, I'm scanning quickly. There's so many great comments. I'm just looking for question marks. Not seeing any. Well, again, if we'll maybe wrap this up, we've been on, wow, for an hour and a half now. Great questions. Again, I read the comments. As I've said, I'm new to this, so I'm not sure how this works. I think once I post the video, hopefully all those comments will still be there. So thank you for great comments. Thank you for great questions. Thank you for your interest. Again, let's remain calm in this time. There's no reason to be upset and panic. Our God will always take care of us. The gates of hell will not prevail against us, and it's just a time to be prepared, be fortified, and we will come through this as well, and we will be rewarded for our faithfulness and for our help for priests. So let's just continue to support the good priests, good bishops, and that's all we can do. So thank you all. It was wonderful getting to talk to all of you. If we maybe got some new technology, maybe Matt and I could do our roundups together and do some more of this, but we'll see if we can look into that. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, and go to traditional Latin Mass tomorrow, no matter what you have to do, notwithstanding this motu proprio. Thank you. God bless you.